Hey there, Genesis International College students, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tackling CPCCBC5002, specifically Topic 5, preparing the final cost report. Now, I know the physical construction phase usually gets all the glory, right? But this module right here, this is the ultimate financial postmortem. Truly, mastering this final stage is exactly what separates your average builders from highly successful senior managers. It's all about how you close out a project, evaluate your wins, and systematically learn from your financial data.
Okay, let's dive into this. When that last brick is laid and the final inspection is passed, it is so tempting to just celebrate, pack up, and move on to the next job. But for a site manager, the transition from the physical building phase into the critical, career-defining paperwork is where the actual project wrap-up happens. This is where we monitor those costing systems on complex builds and figure out exactly where every single dollar went.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at closing the project accounts, then actual costs versus estimates. Third, we'll get into the recommendation report, and finally, adjusting future rates. All right, part 1, closing the project accounts. Listen, just because the heavy machinery has left the site and the physical construction is technically done absolutely does not mean the job is over. Before you can even think about generating a final report, you've got to walk step by step through a pretty rigorous administrative checklist. First up, all production bank accounts tied to the project need to be closed out, and any remaining balances must be transferred back to your organization's main account. Next, you can't leave any loose ends. You really have to resolve all outstanding supplier queries. Then, make sure every single insurance claim is finalized. Fourth, you need to account for all your floats. And finally, depending on your organization's specific policies, you've got to get approval for the journals that move items off your balance sheet, like say petty cash write-offs. Basically, this is the heavy lifting of project closure. Now, why are we being so meticulous about these preceding steps? Well, a final cost report fundamentally requires two major inclusions: uninvoiced liabilities recorded as accrued costs, and a highly detailed list of accrued creditors. Completing these tasks guarantees that we know exactly who is owed further money, because let's face it, there is literally nothing worse than a nasty financial surprise or a forgotten invoice popping up months down the line. We do this to lock that financial door completely tight. Moving right along to part 2, actual costs versus estimates. This right here is the reflect phase of our postmortem, where we perform a critical hindsight check on the project's financial reality. So, the crucial point to understand is cost variance. You are going to want to memorize this definition, not just for your exams at Genesis, but for sure for your future site management roles. Cost variance is, quite simply, the difference between the actual cost incurred for the project and its related budgeted cost. Since we know that the actual costs incurred are almost never exactly equal to the related budgeted costs, understanding this variance is your absolute key to measuring a project's success.
Let's look at the inherent friction between these two concepts. On one side, we have our estimated costs. Remember, these were just approximations made way back during tendering because there were no actual values yet. You just needed to fit the project schedule and secure the bid. But on the flip side, we have the actual costs, the final, cold, hard reality of expenses that you only get full access to at job completion. Analyzing the gap between these two gives you the opportunity to inspect with hindsight. Figuring out exactly how well you did here is how you implement way more effective control systems for all your future endeavors. And this brilliantly illustrates a core concept. A cost report is a living document that should be updated regularly to reflect the actual costs incurred by the project. This is not just passive paperwork that gets shoved in a filing cabinet and forgotten about. It's an active, beating pulse check on the health of your project. If you treat it as a living document throughout the entire build, reconciling it at the end just becomes a process of confirmation, rather than a frantic, stressful search for missing dollars. Okay, let's jump into part 3, the recommendation report. This is where we take all of those raw variances we just calculated and translate them into a formal brief that we can present to the business. You see, finalizing a postmortem isn't just about the numbers. It's about reaching an agreement. You're moving away from the cold data of spreadsheets and into the realm of strategic agreement with your stakeholders. Your recommendation report formally introduces your findings and options to the business, allowing everyone at the table to agree on what happened, why it happened, and what the best path forward actually is. To get to that strategic agreement, your report needs to be incredibly comprehensive, clear, and concise. You have to include a whole list of things to justify your financial conclusions. We're talking cost-benefit analyses of any overtime payments. You need detailed summaries of cost overruns, but also be sure to highlight where you achieved labor savings. Did you find savings on materials or supplies? How did your equipment perform in terms of overall efficiency? You also must account for variations in rates, especially if you had to deal with rise and fall clauses. And of course, detail all wages, penalties, and insurance premiums, including workers' compensation. Leaving any of this out paints an incomplete and frankly inaccurate picture for the business. Now, alongside the recommendation report, many organizations utilize a lessons learned template. Think of this as a retrospective data analysis. You are taking the raw feedback generated from this project's postmortem and using it to create a formalized system for recommended improvements. This document is the ultimate bridge. It directly connects the hard-earned feedback of today's completed project to the success and profitability of tomorrow's build. Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, Adjusting Future Rates. Let's move to and see how this builds into the real world. This is the react phase. We've collected the data, we've analyzed the variance, we've written the reports. Now we take action. Based on your final cost report and market movements, you must adjust organizational rates to match current economic trends. You're matching strategic actions to specific financial triggers. For instance, if the trend dictates a need to lower project expenses, your required action might actually be a reduction of the project scope. If you discover cheaper material options are available, well, you act to reduce costs. Or if you realize there are insufficient funds for completion due to a major economic shift, you are triggered to increase the budget, which formally requires a change request.
And remember, there's a serious domino effect here. When you identify variations and adjust organizational rates, you don't just update one single spreadsheet. This entire suite of supporting documentation must be meticulously updated to stay compliant. Your cost estimates, the core project budget, all income and cost records, your issue logs, and your risk register, they all need to reflect the actions taken and the changes made. Maintaining consistency across all these documents is exactly what keeps your organization financially sound and totally prepared for any audits. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Based on the cost variances and the really hard lessons learned from the project you are closing out today, how will you adjust your estimates for your very next bid? Remember, a successful senior manager doesn't just build structures, they build smarter, much more efficient systems for the future. Take this post-mortem mindset with you onto every single site and let it drive your success in the construction industry. Thanks for joining me for this explainer on Topic 5, and best of luck applying these principles to your own projects.